Hello and welcome to Father's Refuge podcast. My name is James Moffitt, and I'll be your host. In each episode, we dive into real stories of faith, fatherhood, and redemption. Andrew Davey, thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Andrew Davey is a musician and storyteller whose journey through fatherhood, marriage, and personal resilience makes him a compelling guest for Father's Refuge podcast. His experiences with love, loss, and growth align closely with the Father's Refuge mission of supporting men through grief and faith-centered healing. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm good. And so introduce yourself to the listening audience, please.
Okay, well, I think in 2018, I had a ruptured brain aneurysm, and that sort of set my life on a different trajectory. I ended up, I had been a teacher previously and a fiction writer, and the aneurysm sort of forced me to reconsider what my future was going to include, because suddenly things were very different. So I went back to school, and I am now a clinical mental health counselor. And my thought was that I could help other people navigate through their recoveries with traumatic and acquired brain injuries. And then in 2022, after I was in school already, my mother was diagnosed with ALS, and I moved back in with my parents to be her primary caregiver, or one of her primary caregivers. And then she passed in 2024, and I moved back. I moved out of my parents' house after that. And that pretty much takes us up to where we are today.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your loss. I know that that can be a very painful thing to experience and to talk about. Father's Refuge is a podcast that is there for fathers to talk about their life experiences, their fathering journey, what it is to teach kids and to prepare them for the world, as well as to discuss any kind of traumatic injuries or treatment journeys that they may have walked through. So I feel that your story is certainly applicable to our mission here.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I guess it's been a very interesting journey for me. I had my aneurysm right before I was about to board a plane in 2018. Came out of nowhere. This is before COVID. So the only symptoms I had were when I got to my gate and I was getting ready to board the plane, I began to sweat uncontrollably, which at the time I thought might just be a symptom of the flu or a cold. And then they called my group to board, and I tried to lift my bag, and it felt like it had cinder blocks in there, which again, in hindsight, was probably another serious red flag. But at the time, I thought if I could just get on the plane, I'll take a nap. I'm sure I'll feel better when I land. And fortunately for me, I tripped and fell before I could get on the jetway. So thankfully, because I was at the airport and it was early in the morning, first responders could get to me, and I was taken to the hospital. And that the order of events and how they happened is why I'm here talking to you right now. Had anything changed, the first year of my recovery was very much physical. What I had assumed as I was going through things was that the physical and emotional recoveries would happen at the same time. And what I discovered afterward was that the first year, my mind hadn't really begun to unpack the emotional elements of it. So when I got out of the hospital, I needed to use a cane to walk, and I had to build up my endurance. I had double vision, so I wore an eye patch. My ability to make abstract connections wasn't really there. So the first year was a lot of work just developing the physical recovery. It wasn't until 2019 that I began to think about a lot of existential questions, like what would my life now look like? I had been a teacher, so should I go back to teaching? And then it took about 3 years to feel comfortable emotionally sort of moving forward. Again, the COVID pandemic wasn't fortunate for anything, but that also allowed me some time I moved back in with my parents, and I could focus exclusively on healing. And that's when I realized that counseling would be a better fit for me than trying to go back into the classroom. And one of the side effects of the aneurysm is that my emotional processing was affected. So I don't process joy or sadness the same way that I used to. It's more of a blunted experience, which initially I thought was going to be a big hindrance because I wasn't able to process joy the same way that I used to. But it ended up being a silver lining because I could take care of my mother, which was a very overwhelmingly negative experience for everyone else, but I could sort of endure seeing her in such a compromised position without it really affecting me emotionally. So that's pretty much what the last couple of years have been like in terms of managing the recovery. I've also had to address grief, with my own transition in terms of becoming a new person and adjusting to that, but also grieving the loss of my mother. And really just the dynamic that we had in our family has changed. And I do facilitate a grief support group now where I practice, and I learned a lot in school about managing grief in a different way. So it's been really helpful. Initially, I had gone back to school thinking that because I could work, I should be engaged and try to do something that would be helpful. But it's turned out to be personally applicable as well. So it's been really enjoyable.
One of the topics that we talk about on this podcast is loss and grief. And while I focus primarily on fathers and treatment journeys for their children and loss of loved ones, whether it be a child, grandparent, parent, wife, spouse, significant other, however you want to label them. There are other things in life that we experience grief because of loss. And it's like loss of a relationship with your spouse, loss of a parent, or loss of a job. Somebody that's been in a job for 20, 30 years and they get laid off, or they retire, or, you find yourself wearing a hat of identity, or where, you're like, especially for men, you're the protector of your family, you're the provider for your family, you go to work every day and provide a paycheck so you can keep a roof over everybody's heads, food on the table, and all of that. And then all of a sudden you're kicked to the curb because a company is reorganizing, or the shareholders decide they want more money in their pockets, and so therefore the company downsizes, and all of a sudden you're without a job, and your identity is shattered, right? And so you experience loss, and of course, along with loss comes grief, and sometimes us guys don't know how to process that, and so it's interesting to hear you talk about your brain aneurysm and the how it all transpired, and you talk about sort of your loss of identity, your loss of who you were before the aneurysm, and your mental acuity, and the psychology of who you were, physiology of who you were, and how you lost all of that, and you had to sort of remake yourself, and you had to reacclimate yourself to things that you normally would experience, and it was just normal to you. You go from situation to situation, and you knew how to handle it. Now all of a sudden you're having to learn how to walk again, and you're having to learn, like you said, you had to learn how to process emotions, common emotions that we all deal with. And yeah, if you could talk about some of that, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, I think so. I had certain life goals. I think that I grew up in New York City in the 80s and 90s. And it was very much, I think, the brass ring at the time, which is probably still very similar, but to be very successful financially, to be married and have a family, to have children and pets and a car and a house in the suburbs and all of these sorts of things. And after the aneurysm, some of the goals that I'd had suddenly either didn't seem attainable or they didn't seem as important. So a lot of what I had to kind of consider was, since I had projected so much value onto what I had hoped to do, could there still be value if I changed direction? So for a few years, it was finding that, yes, I didn't necessarily have to have the life that I had anticipated in order to be successful. But that took a lot of time to kind of feel comfortable with. One thing that the aneurysm did that was unexpected is it sort of gave me an opportunity to take a step back and reevaluate everything in a different context. Whereas I had assumed that success had to include a couple of things on the list, I realized that success was just being the best version of myself that I could be. And that may not look like what I had anticipated or include those things, but in time I was able to feel more comfortable allowing them to sort of be discovered later on.
Yeah, I think the world around us and the culture that we're in kind of dictates to us what our value is and what success looks like, right? And that's why it's so important that as individuals and as fathers that we don't compare ourselves to others, right? Because that's just so detrimental in so many ways. And I think a lot of that's deeply rooted in our childhood, and how our parents raised us and how our parents responded to external stimulus in their lives, right? And I think there was a song back in I'm a child of the 80s, 70s and 80s, and I think there was a song that I can't sing it and I don't know what the lyrics are, but basically it was talking about keeping up with the Joneses, right? And if the Joneses have a brand new car, then we need to go get a brand new car. If they have a better house than we do, then maybe we need to learn how to figure out a way to make enough money to get a better house, right? And so, and the list just goes on and on and on. And the advent of social media has made it acutely more of a problem than it ever was before, because people have online personas. You see these influencers, and you see these highly successful people on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and all these different social media platforms. But that's not really a reality, right? That's not to say that what they're presenting to the world, like if they have a talent, if they're a singer or dancer, whatever they're, artist, whatever they're entrepreneurs or creatives. And it's not to say that what their talent is not invalid. Is that people like to put their best foot forward, right? And that's not necessary. You don't see what the garbage that's going on in the background. You don't see the struggle. You don't see all of the different things that has to happen in order for them to get to that place, right? And life is just not a bed of roses. It's not, life is not happy, happy, joy, joy. That's every day we just don't sit in a room and go, I'm just so happy about everything, right? And that's not reality. And so it's interesting that you talk about how your vision or your what's the word I'm looking for? Your example of what success would look like, right? Everybody, especially in the 70s and 80s, our vision of success was, you know, getting through school, going to college, getting a degree, getting a corner office job, making 30,000 a year, and marrying a beautiful wife, and having a house with a picket fence and lots of kids and dogs running around. And that was the American dream back then. And I think over the years the American culture has changed so radically that maybe that's not the picture of success anymore. And so when external things happen to us and internal things happen to us, it forces us to take a serious look inside and go, well, it's like you said, what does success mean for me now? It's not necessarily a picket fence and a house with a wife and kids. Maybe it's the ability to just survive and to walk and talk and process emotions and be able to face the trials of the day without falling apart, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it.
So you had to learn how to walk again. You had to, you're experiencing loss and grief. And maybe, were you ever angry about what happened to you?
Not so much angry. I think there was a kind of a radical acceptance that this just sort of happened. I don't know if I was ever angry about that. I was more focused on what am I going to do to move forward rather than how did this happen. I think typically what I had, I had an aneurysm ruptured on my brainstem, which is not it's not rare, but it's less frequent, and typically it can be exacerbated by certain things. Certain drug addictions might do that, which I don't have. Might be genetics, but there's no history of that in my family. So for me, it just happened to take place. It was a random sort of thing. So, but again, my thought process was just kind of like, okay, this happened. How do I manage from here? As opposed to dwelling on, I think probably there was a certain amount of time where I was just more overwhelmed emotionally about it, sad and sort of questioning like, okay, well, now what? Rather than thinking about being angry about it.
Did you go through a period of time where you were questioning why it happened? Like, why me, Lord? Why did this have to happen to me?
Again, not so, I didn't really take the time to look at it that way. I sort of feel like these things happen pretty frequently, throughout time. There was really nothing that I did to put me in this position. So I just sort of figured like, okay, well, this happened, again, like sort of now what? Now what do I, how do I make the best of this situation? I started to, think of it sort of like I was playing poker. I was dealt certain cards that I had nothing to do with. And I have cards in the middle of the table that we can all use to try and make the best hand. So how am I going to make the best hand? And that's where I focused most of my energies instead of reflecting on what had happened.
Gotcha. Well, and I think that was advantageous to you as well if you didn't have to wade through. I think some people get angry. A lot of people get angry about the hands that they're dealt in life, right? And I
Yeah.
think sometimes I like to tell people that one of my attitudes towards life is I want to do the best I can today with what I have, right? I have what's going on inside my head, my heart, in those external circumstances outside of me that I have no control over, right? So I'll just try to do the best I can with what I have. And I think sometimes there's a conflict there. I think there's a conflict with, well, these external things are happening to me. I have no control over them. So where do I go from here? Right. And I think that's where resilience comes in, and I think that's where some people struggle because they don't have that resilience and they don't know how to overcome those external forces that are affecting their lives. Right. Or having an aneurysm or a heart attack or some, physical, issue or problem or ailment that happens just out of the blue. Right. And you're like, oh, great. Now what?
There's a movie that I like called The Edge with Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where he and Alec Baldwin and Harold Perrineau are lost in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
And Anthony Hopkins says most people lost in the woods, die of shame. And then when they ask him what he means by that, he says, they spend all their time thinking, what could I have done differently? How did I get into this position? Instead of spending time doing the one thing that would help them get out of there, which is sort of thinking, okay, well, what do I do next? So I adopted that approach rather than, I would give myself time, certainly, to question what happened. I think it was important to put into context the fact that had anything been different, it would have been a really horrible situation for me. But things ended up working out the way that they did. So I made sure not to spend too much time thinking about that, but I gave myself a sort of requisite amount of time to think about, okay, what happened? How did this happen? Why did this happen? But mostly it was just, okay, this happened. How do I address this in a healthy way moving forward?
That's awesome. That's great. Now, I just went to your Podmatch profile and looked at your profile, and I want to read this little blurb here for the listening audience. About Andrew Davey, I can discuss my experiences growing up in New York City, teaching, working in finance and theater, writing, brain aneurysm recovery, co-hosting a music review show in Macau, Hong Kong. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Macau, but it's
Macau, Hong Kong. That's interesting. Playing the guitar, attempting to make a documentary film about a former middleweight boxing champion, teaching in the U.S. and abroad to middle, high school, college, English as a second language, students with ADHD and learning differences, caregiving for a parent with ALS, practicing mental health counseling as an LGPC. What is an LGPC?
it's a licensed graduate professional counselor. It's very similar to if you go to medical school and you become a doctor, you do a residency afterwards where you're technically a doctor, but you're sort of still under supervision. So
Got you.
I'm not independently licensed. I'm licensed in the state of Maryland, but I require a certain amount of hours of supervision before I can be independently licensed.
I got you. Well, it's very admirable that you went to college and got licensed to be a professional counselor. So so you're paying it forward, right? I mean, did your experience motivate you to do that?
Absolutely. Most I'm not sure what the statistics are, but most people who had what I had either don't survive at all, or if they do, they end up having a very serious cognitive issue for the rest, or physical issue for the rest of their life that sort of precludes them from either returning to work or being able to pursue anything. So I sort of looked at this like I owed it to myself to find something engaging that I could do that I would really be passionate about. But I also owed it to a lot of my friends who can't go back to work. Not to mention, there wasn't really a lot of information out there for people like myself with regard to how to manage the emotional recovery. There are plenty of supports that are in place with different therapists that can help you physically recover. But I sort of thought I have this unique perspective. I've lived a very interesting existence. I should try to use that to help other people. And that will be one of the fulfilling things that I had assumed would be taken care of by my previous goals. But instead, it turned out that the path that I forged ahead didn't look like anything I had anticipated it ever would, but it's become something that I've really gotten a lot of pleasure from.
That's good. Hey, friend, if this conversation is resonating with you, take a moment to subscribe to Father's Refuge. It's one simple way to stay connected to stories that matter. If something in today's episode speaks to your heart, leave a comment or share it with someone who needs it. And if you want to reach out to me personally, I'd love to hear from you. You can text me from the podcast episode itself. You can email me at fathersrefuge@proton.me. That's fathersrefuge@proton.me. Your voice matters here. It's awesome that you're paying it forward and you're in a position now to where you can help others that are kind of walking the path that you were on and are probably still on to a certain degree. So, can you talk a little bit about caregiving with your mother?
Sure. So, I guess sometime in 2021, my mother broke her ankle, and that was probably when her symptoms really began to show themselves. She had been a tennis player and noticed that she wasn't moving the way she had previously been able to on the tennis court. So she went to a few doctors and was misdiagnosed a couple of times until sometime in 2022, they diagnosed her with ALS. And for the first year, I would say, she could still pretty much take care of herself in terms of getting. She had a cane and a walker, but she could still drive, she could still speak, she could still move, basically. And then sometime in June of 2023, I went to go visit my parents for what was going to be July 4th weekend. And my father told me that he was having real difficulty. So they would have an aide come in to help my mother during the day. And then in the late afternoon, early evening, my father would take over and care for my mother by himself. And he told me that it was really becoming too difficult for him to do that anymore. So we sort of both decided that I would move back in and continue to go to school part-time since I could do so virtually. And basically, so I was there for about a year and a half. And while I was there, she plateaued a little bit and then sort of lost the ability to move, to speak, just really, she had a feeding tube. So all of these things that really required someone be there full time. What's really nice that I can always look back on is that I was able to help provide her a quality of life that she wouldn't have had had I not been there. Plus, it was not, very few people get to spend quality time with their parents later in life. I was very fortunate that I was able to do that, and I had a great relationship with both of them. It turned out to be a really wonderful time. Again, it looked like nothing that I would have anticipated or ever thought, hey, I know it'll be a good time. Let's move back in with mom and dad and, take care of mom when she gets sick. But also, I guess because of what I had already been through with the aneurysm, I was ready for it.
Yeah, I would imagine that you had a heightened sense of compassion and empathy for your mother.
Sure. Well, and also taking care of her became a profound satisfaction that I had sort of been looking for. After the aneurysm, it was kind of like, okay, well, now what will I do that will give me the same satisfaction that I thought writing and publishing would, for example? And it turned out to be taking care of her was really worthwhile.
I guess it gave you a new sense of purpose.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. The circle of life for most people, nobody wants to bury children, right? And unfortunately, I've had to bury two. And typically in the circle of life, it's, you get married, you have kids, you raise your kids, watch them grow up, and then you grow old, right? And then we enter into our second childhood as we become elderly. And then hopefully our children are there for us and can help take care of us in our old age, when we need it. And some people are blessed to have a good relationship with their children, and that happens. And I think that's I don't know. I think that's a good thing, and I think it's something that should happen. It should be, I think, expected. I think parents do expect that because you spend a good, I don't know, I don't know what the percentage is. 45-50% of your adulthood bringing new life into the world and raising them or protecting them and providing for them, and you sacrifice a lot, for your children to grow into teenagers and preteens and adults, and you would hope that they would that your relationship with them would be such that they would feel not less necessarily obligated, but they would want to take care of you. They would want to be there for you and provide as much as they can, And so anyway, it's great. It's great that you were able to step in and help your dad with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, do you still co-host the show Happy Hour with Heather and guest?
I don't. The show is on hiatus right now. We
Oh, okay.
haven't recorded an episode probably in about 6 months to a year, I would say. I should probably
Okay.
update that. But yeah, that was a fun. We both, Heather and I, are both fans of heavy metal music, so this was
Okay.
an opportunity for us to help some. We would we would showcase the music of a lot of underground bands that were trying to get better well known. So we would help sort of market and promote them by
I
talking
got
about
you.
their music.
That's awesome. I feel like I wasn't as prepared for this interview as I should have been, but that's okay. I think we've had a good conversation, and I certainly appreciate your time to come onto the podcast and to talk about your experiences. And I'm glad that you have been pretty successful in overcoming that aneurysm, and you're able to take care of your mother, and you're showing a lot of emotional resilience. And I would say you're probably a success story compared to maybe some other people that haven't been able to successful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I am grateful for the chance. And I appreciate the
So,
kind words. Sorry.
amen. No, you're fine. So I want to give you like a 5-minute elevator speech opportunity to where you could talk to the listening audience and talk to them about whatever it is you would like to talk to them about.
Well, I would say for anyone who's recovering from anything, be it a traumatic or acquired brain injury or just any sort of experience, to remember that recovery is usually in a spiral. It's not a straight line. So to give it the patience that it might need, you're going to heal on a different timetable than the one that's in your mind. So just be cognizant of that. For people who are caregiving or helping somebody through grief, I would say being present is probably the most important thing you could do rather than try to fix a problem, for example. So most people just benefit from somebody listening. So I would say those would be my two for people who are recovering from something themselves or who are trying to help other people. Typically, it's just being present and being empathetic are the most important things you can do.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate your time. And to the listening audience, I would say thank you for the privilege of your time. Thanks for listening to the Father's Refuge podcast. If today encouraged you, share it with someone who needs it. And you can go to fathersrefuge.com. It's our website, and you can see all the different podcast episodes that have come out. And I have a lot of resources on there as well. You can reach me via email at fathersrefuge@proton.me. That's fathersrefuge@proton.me. So anyways, if today encouraged you, share it with someone who needs it. And until next time, keep walking in faith and hope. And Andrew, thank you again for being here.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.